For most of human history, money changed slowly. Coins were passed from hand to hand until their edges softened. Notes were rare, precious, and trusted. Prices moved across years, not hours. A man could work, save, and expect that what he earned would still matter when he needed it. In 1913, Germany was a country that still lived inside this rhythm. It was one of the most advanced industrial societies the world had ever seen. Its factories ran on precision. Its railways connected cities with mathematical accuracy. Its universities produced engineers, chemists, physicists, and economists who were respected across Europe. German money meant something. A mark could buy bread. It could pay rent. It could be saved. And most importantly, it could be trusted. When the First World War began, that trust did not disappear overnight. Germany did not finance the war the way it had financed past conflicts, with taxes. Instead, it borrowed. The government told its citizens that victory would pay for everything. War bonds were sold as patriotic duty. Families invested their savings in the promise of triumph. It was a decision that delayed pain and created illusion. And illusions are always expensive. By 1918, Germany was exhausted. The factories still stood, but they were worn. The railways still ran, but they were strained. The people still worked, but they were tired. When defeat came, it was not just military. It was financial. The empire collapsed, the Kaiser fled, and the new republic inherited something far more dangerous than rubble. It inherited debt. Not ordinary debt. Not temporary debt. Debt that could not be paid. The Treaty of Versailles demanded reparations. The number was so large, it barely made sense to the people who signed it. Gold, foreign currency. Coal. Industrial output. Germany would pay, year after year, for a war it had already lost. And the payments were not symbolic. They were enforced. If Germany did not pay, foreign troops would take what they needed. This was the moment when German money began to crack. The new Weimar Republic faced a problem no modern state had faced before. Raising taxes would spark revolt. Cutting spending would collapse industry. Defaulting would invite occupation. So, the government reached for the one tool that felt painless. They printed. At first, it did not feel dangerous. Wages were paid. Pensions continued. Factories stayed open. The streets remained calm. The presses ran quietly, and the people breathed. But the money being created was not wealth. It was delay. Inflation does not announce itself. It whispers. In 1919, prices crept upward. In 1920, they moved faster. By 1921, something had changed in the way people looked at their wallets. Savers noticed first. The mark bought less each month. Then, each week. Still, most people believed it would stop, because it always had before. Foreign currencies began to appear in markets. Barter returned quietly. Farmers demanded goods instead of money. The government printed more to calm the tension, and each time it did, the mark lost a little more meaning. The problem was no longer economic. It was psychological. Money was becoming uncertain, and when money becomes uncertain, time itself collapses. People stop planning. They stop saving. They stop trusting. They start rushing. By 1922, Germany was living in two worlds. On paper, everything still functioned. Wages were paid. Bills were printed. Shops were open. But underneath, something had broken. Money was no longer a store of value. It was a melting object, and the government, terrified of collapse, did the only thing it knew how to do. It printed faster. In January 1923, the illusion ended. French and Belgian troops marched into the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heart, to seize coal and steel as payment for missed reparations. It was a foreign occupation, but not a military invasion in the old sense. It was economic enforcement. The German government responded with a decision that would finish the mark. They called for passive resistance. Workers were told not to cooperate. Factories were told to stop. Railways were told to stand still. And the government promised to pay everyone anyway. They paid them with money that did not exist. The presses no longer ran quietly. They roared. Paper flooded the country. Bills were printed with more zeros, then more again. The numbers lost scale. 1 million became normal. 1 billion became necessary. Wages were paid twice a day, sometimes 3 times. People ran from factories to shops, from shops to markets, from markets back to factories. The mark was no longer money. It was a hot object. You held it only long enough to get rid of it. Prices stopped moving daily. They moved hourly. A cup of coffee cost 1 price in the morning, and another by afternoon. Restaurants stopped printing menus. Shops wrote prices in chalk, then erased them, then rewrote them again. The entire economy turned into a race, and no one could win. The people who suffered first were the ones who had done everything right. Teachers, clerks, retirees, widows. A lifetime of saving disappeared in weeks. Pensions became jokes. Insurance became paper. Bank accounts became illusions. Those who owed debts were freed. Those who had trusted the system were destroyed. This reversal would leave a scar that never healed. As money died, behavior changed. Crime rose. Speculation replaced work. People stopped producing and started gambling. Farmers refused to sell food for money. They demanded shoes, tools, furniture, anything that held value longer than paper. The cities began to starve. And still, the presses ran, because stopping meant admitting the truth. The government blamed merchants. They blamed speculators. They blamed foreigners. Price controls were imposed. Markets disappeared. Black markets replaced them. Trust collapsed. And when trust collapses, laws become suggestions. The mark was now worthless. But worse, it was meaningless. By late 1923, the numbers became absurd. A loaf of bread cost billions. A stamp cost more than a meal. Children used banknotes as toys. Old men burned them for warmth. Money had become garbage, and Germany, a country built on discipline, order, and precision, had lost its anchor. Then, almost as suddenly as it began, the noise stopped. In November 1923, the government introduced a new currency, the Rentenmark. It was limited. It was disciplined. And it was backed not by gold, but by land and trust. The miracle happened. Prices stabilized. Markets reopened. The panic ended. But the damage did not disappear. It sank into memory. When the Rentenmark stabilized prices, the world breathed again. Shops reopened. Wages became predictable. Contracts returned. The noise of panic faded. On paper, Germany had been saved, but economies do not recover the way buildings do. What had been destroyed in 1923 was not just money. It was faith. Millions of Germans had done everything right and lost everything anyway. They had worked. They had saved. They had trusted institutions. And the institutions had erased them. That kind of loss does not fade. It hardens. The middle class, once the backbone of stability, was shattered. People who had believed in patience learned to move fast. People who had believed in saving learned to spend. People who had believed in moderation learned to gamble. Speculation became normal. Risk became survival. The lesson was simple, and it was brutal. Trust nothing that you cannot touch. The hyperinflation of 1923 did not create extremism, but it prepared the ground. When the next crisis came, and it would, Germans remembered. They remembered paper turning to dust. They remembered savings disappearing. They remembered the state lying calmly while everything burned. So when new leaders promised order, certainty, and control, the promise sounded like safety. The fear of inflation would shape German politics for generations. Even decades later, it still does. Germany's collapse in 1923 is often described as a failure of economics. It was not. It was a failure of discipline. The state discovered that it could delay pain by printing money, and each delay made the final reckoning worse. The tragedy was not that Germany printed. The tragedy was that it did not stop. This was not new. Empires had done this before. They would do it again. When money becomes a political tool instead of a measuring tool, it dies. And when money dies, society begins to unlearn restraint. Germany simply showed the world what happens when the process goes all the way. Every system believes it can manage printing. Every government believes it will stop in time. Every generation believes it is smarter than the last. Germany believed that too. And in 1923, money showed what it does to those beliefs. It exposed them. The collapse of the mark was not an accident. It was not fate. It was not a natural disaster. It was a decision repeated until there were no decisions left. This was the moment money stopped being money, and once that happens, everything else follows. Today, the images remain. Wheelbarrows of cash, children playing with banknotes, prices written in chalk and erased an hour later. They are not curiosities. They are warnings. Because the system that failed in 1923 was not unique. It was human. If you want to understand how societies truly collapse, do not watch their armies. Watch their money.